Hurricane narratives have been a part of my life ever since I was a child. I had a wonderful child living on the island of enchantment known as Puerto Rico. My best childhood moments were alongside my grandmother, Mama Colon, where she would tell me stories about her life living on the island. One of my favorite parts of her stories were when she was telling me how the community would band together through times of crisis. A lot of her words still resonate with me today. It's a practice of how she would use Proverbs as a storytelling practice where all Puerto Ricans would share teachings and knowledge from generations to generations. One of her Proverbs, and I'll quote, and I'll do my best to impersonate my grandmother. Javi, después de la tormenta viene la calma. This signifies the importance of holding on to hope. Hope is what makes us people, she would say. Hope is what gives us the motivation and encouragement to see the light at the end of the tunnel, even though we went through a catastrophic event such as hurricanes. I like to think of hurricane narratives in the same scope because as I reflect and talk about my own personal hurricane narratives, I'm also doing a call to action to you all as a community. We have to acknowledge that hurricane narratives opens our perspective and reality that the world is changing. Our climate is changing. And I think us as people, as a community, as humans of the world, have a responsibility to advocate and educate about this phenomenon that's happening right now. I'm not only speaking for myself and my own hurricane narrative, I'm also thinking about the thousands of Puerto Rican brothers and sisters who to this day still suffer the lasting effects of Hurricane George, Hurricane Maria, Hurricane Irma, and Hurricane Fiona that happened recently in 2021. I like to give thanks to this opportunity because this space allows me to share this hurricane narrative, my own hurricane story that I've kept silent for years and years after Hurricane Maria back in 2017. I want to tell a story of what I've learned surviving this catastrophic hurricane alongside my Puerto Rican community, how this fostered a way and opened a space for me to reflect back on my past trauma, and really open my vulnerability to really think back and reach back into what really signifies having a hurricane narrative. But most importantly, why is it so important to tell this story and to share it with others? As a poet, I found avenue in my own creative expression in writing poetry about my traumas with hurricanes. And lastly, I want to emphasize that my journey and my own story really talks about the importance of resiliency, healing, as I use poetry as my own healing tool, a creative expression to express my own trauma with hurricane narratives, but most importantly, how important it is for us as humans to feel empathy. Now, I'm gonna take a step back. I do want to talk about the importance of resiliency and empathy. For me, resiliency is that mental and physical capability for us to cope after a moment of crisis, such as hurricanes, for example. Now, the media and a lot of people might be thinking, well, we're sad that you suffered the hurricane, but it passed. You should be better, right? No. For me, trauma is part of my identity. Trauma is with me at all times. And yes, through therapy, through tools, I have learned to cope with that. But it's also important to acknowledge that the importance of resiliency is that ability to move forward even after a catastrophic event. It's the ability to keep our activism going, to ask for more funding, to ask for more hurricane relief and what that looks like. We can't stay silent after a devastating event. We can't let other people keep us silent. We need to keep going and we need to share our own hurricane narratives. This leads to empathy. Empathy for me is the emotional and social tool which allows us the ability to understand another person's lived experience, even though we ourselves don't identify or relate exactly to that person's lived experience. Now, you might be wondering, well, isn't that the same as sympathy? No. For me, empathy takes a step further. For me, empathy really gives me the chance to step on that other person's shoes and really feel like what's it like experiencing a Category 4 or Category 5 hurricane? What's it really like to experience that devastating event where everything you knew one day was completely swept away from you and gone the next day? And I want to reiterate, hurricane narratives don't stop the moment the hurricane leaves. They continue even after the aftermath of hurricanes. Because we have to put in a perspective. Using myself as an example, I spent over 40 days without water and over 60 days without electricity. Many Puerto Ricans during Hurricane Maria spent months without the basic necessities and no resources available to help them in that time of need. I'd like to take a moment and invite you to the space of my younger self, of my childhood Edsel at 6 years old. I like to read the poem, My House Turned into a Sailboat, where I open the door into a perspective of how it looks like one day when I was having fun as a child, enjoying the sandy beaches of Puerto Rico, and then the next day, Hurricane George hit back in 1998. My house turned into a sailboat. George turned my house into a sailboat, a cement-made ship to stay in one place. A home faded in shaded ruined yellow, faded, drifting away as my pink sailboat, the one the ocean took from me as I was playing captain of a sailboat, and ruined because of George. I still have very vivid memories of Hurricane George, even though it happened years ago. It's amazing how trauma can help you recollect all those finite moments that you were scared. I still remember spending the time with my family, my sister, my mom, my grandmother, and my aunt. I remember days before the hurricane hit the island where we would go to multiple supermarkets just to get necessities. You might be wondering, what are those necessities? They can look as first aid, canned foods, supply of water, power generators, and just to make sure we have enough to survive, because again, we don't know how many days we'll be left with no resources. We have no idea how many days we'll be stuck in survival mode after a catastrophic Category 4 hurricane. I remember feeling very scared. I remember shivering a lot in my aunt's house. What gave me strength was my grandmother's comforting words. I remember she hugged me tight and she told me, "No te preocupes, mi niño. A mal tiempo, buena cara." Another example of storytelling and the power of Puerto Rican proverbs. This one has a different meaning because she reiterated in every moment of Hurricane George that it is important to maintain a positive attitude in the face of adversity. That yes, right now we're suffering together, but this too shall pass. You shouldn't be scared of this. This is common in our Caribbean experience. This inspired me to start writing my chapbook, Irma, Maria, Fiona, and Me. You might be wondering, well, Edsel, you talk a lot about George. Why isn't George in the title? And again, I receive that question all the time when I give talks about my chapbook and poetry. And again, this is me thinking of paying homage to the women in my life, to the women who gave me courage to make me the person I am today. I like to think of each of the hurricanes representing my mom, mother, and grandmother who gave me strength and always believed in me. I added George because George was my first ever hurricane narrative, and I thought that was important to mention, to really look deep into the power of what it means to look deep into yourself, that deep reflection, and really talk about hurricanes. Because again, I know that hundreds of people out there have experienced similar lived experience to hurricanes and are still too afraid to speak out and really reveal and share these stories. I hope that with my talk today, I inspire a lot of people to share their hurricane stories, to become vulnerable and really reflect and deep down on the importance of this. And again, this is not just a survival story, and I really don't like it when people downgrade it and just say, well, you survived, what's next? Again, survival stories have a deep personal connection with me because I'm not just telling my story, I'm also thinking of the thousands of Puerto Ricans, either at home right now in Puerto Rico or part of the global diaspora, where they too have suffered hurricanes either as insiders or outsiders of this phenomenon. I want to pay homage and let them know that it's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to talk about these experiences. You're not alone. And this leads to the empathetic bond that we build as Puerto Ricans, and we also build as citizens and humans of the global community, who you too have similar experience to those who suffered hurricanes. In my next poem, Pinwheels and Whispers, I reflect as an adult poet talking to my 6-year-old self, Edsel. Here, we discuss and really collaborate into digging deep into our own personal trauma with Hurricane George and really reflect on this. Pinwheels and whispers. My pinwheel brought me joy, a feeling to remember for this chubby boy, until my pinwheel started to spin faster, so fast that I felt a gust of wind, a phenomenon I could not understand. As the wind picked me up, as they were, my mama's arms embracing me, grabbing me to make sure I'm safe, holding me to make sure I'm here. But I was not here. I was taken away, and before I was trapped in Oz, I woke up in awe. Imagine yourselves in the shoes of 6-year-old Etzel. Imagine yourselves in the shoes of a child who just experienced a devastating Category 4 or Category 5 hurricane. I want to ask you this. How will you comfort this child? What resources would you recommend to their parents to help them cope with trauma? I want to acknowledge that hurricane narratives are not just a Caribbean experience. I want to acknowledge that all over the world, you too also experience something similar to hurricanes. I like to think of Hurricane Katrina, for example, and the devastating damage it did to New Orleans and Midwestern states. If we think hurricanes as a global perspective, I like to think of how other places in the world suffer from typhoons. You, as citizens of the Midwest, you have something called Tornado Alley, which starts from early summer into late spring. In one way or another, all of us have a hurricane narrative hidden inside of us. And here today, I'm advocating about the urgency and the importance for all of you to really look yourself in deep down and rediscover your past traumas and rediscover the importance of what it means to be comfortable with your voice and express your own hurricane narratives. Let me ask you this. Does trauma leave the body? I would say no. As I mentioned before, trauma is part of my identity, it's part of who I am. As I tell my students when I'm teaching mental health and children's literature, it's not a common cold. We don't just get it, feel better, and keep going as if nothing happened. After Hurricane Maria, I, for years, was begging that sense of normalcy. I wanted my life so hard to be normal again, but I had to accept that that was not an option. I really wanted to dig deep and really focus on ways to cope with my trauma and to tell my own hurricane narratives. That's where I started the process of writing as a way to heal from that trauma. And that's when I started my manuscript of my chapbook of poetry. My next poem, Maria the Catastrophe, I reveal and give a lot of information of how devastating Hurricane Maria was back in 2017. Maria the Catastrophe. The aftermath was as bad as the hurricane, Maria's last gift to the island. Months without basic necessities. Never mind no electricity, no water for weeks due to contamination, no food for weeks due to the pause of shipments, no resources due to people in power keeping them locked in warehouses, no way to communicate with friends and families of the diaspora. A true Caribbean experience, one no Puerto Rican will ever forget, regardless of where you were, either on the island or in another place in the world. Poetry has been my avenue and creative expression to process my trauma with hurricanes. My writing process was not easy. I remember looking at my manuscript. I remember looking at past iterations of my poems. I was not satisfied with anything I wrote. Hurricane Maria took a lot of me. Unfortunately, Hurricane Maria took the life of my uncle. Months later, my grandma passed away. I felt like Hurricane Maria took my voice and kept me silent for years because of the trauma I've suffered. After reading a lot of my old poems, I decided I can't stay silent anymore. I've decided I need to tell my hurricane narrative. I need to share my story with the world. So after remembering past memories, starting from my childhood, from my adulthood experience with Hurricane Maria and Hurricane Irma as well, because again, we were gonna face 2 hurricanes that same year. I decided to write, just keep writing, make different versions of my poems, collect them and join them together, where each represented a moment where a key moment in my life and trauma was represented by a hurricane, whether that's George, Irma, Maria, or Fiona. I decided that I can't stay silent because my words matter, my story matters, and I want people out there that still feel vulnerable, that still feel scared to share the hurricane narrative, that it's okay. I want you all to start really reaching that path and start that first step into discovering your own hurricane narrative and telling your story. Because again, it's not just about collective survival. It's about the collective stories we share together as a global community, where we go and face our silent and our past trauma, and we learn to cope with that. Writing poetry encouraged mindfulness, but I also like to think that writing poetry saved my life in many ways. It really gave me the space to finally talk about my trauma with hurricanes and feel confident in expressing my vulnerability and emotions to the world. I started this talk by referencing my grandmother's stories. I wish she was alive right now, so I could let her know that I too became one of those characters from her stories, that I too have learned to overcome my own trauma and hurricane narratives. I really want to leave everyone with the idea that it's okay, that at first it's scary, that at first it's a very traumatic event, but I want you to know that it's okay for you to share your stories. Your voice matters. What you have to say matters in this world, and that's a very beautiful thing when collectively we band together and share our stories. This is an example of how I feel resiliency as a Puerto Rican, as a member now of the Midwest as I finish my PhD in children's literature. I want to express the joy of feeling empathy. And yes, while you don't have exactly that same shared experience, that doesn't stop you from feeling what the other person is going through. That doesn't stop you from giving that person aid, that person support, and most importantly, advocate more for hurricane relief. Advocate more for people who to this day are still suffering the aftermath of hurricanes all around the world. I'd like to thank all of you for your time and attention of hearing my story. Thank you so much.